She didn't catch her husband cheating. No lipstick on the collar, no suspicious texts. What she found was somehow worse, her husband calmly moving his things into another woman's bedroom, in their own house, and smiling about it. Imagine being married for 4 years to someone you genuinely believed was your person. Smart, charming, funny, the whole package. You built a life together, you thought you knew exactly what you had, and then one evening you come home from work, and the life you thought you had is just gone. That's exactly what happened to our girl. Let's call her Ava. She's 28, her husband Mark is 30, and they've been together for 7 years total. By all accounts, a solid couple, a real marriage. But there was always one thing. Mark had a childhood best friend, a woman named Fiona. And I mean childhood. We're talking same kindergarten, same elementary school, same middle school, same high school, same college. They were inseparable for decades. The kind of friendship that has its own gravitational pull. From the moment Ava met Fiona, something felt off. Fiona made a point, almost like a joke, but not really, of telling Ava that she was the third most important woman in Mark's life. First his mother, second Fiona herself, then Ava. Let that sink in. And it only got worse from there. The passive aggressive comments about Ava's makeup, the backhanded compliments designed to make her feel small. At one point, Fiona straight up told her that Mark has a thing for dumb blondes, and Ava is blonde. Every time Ava tried to talk to Mark about it, he brushed it off, said Fiona was just blunt, and that most women couldn't handle her directness. Which, pause, he was basically putting other women down to defend Fiona's behavior. Red flag? Absolutely. But Ava loved him, and love has a way of making red flags look like decorations. Things actually got better for a while when Fiona started dating a guy named Eddie. She backed off, the tension cooled, and Ava finally felt like she could breathe. Fiona and Eddie got engaged, then married. Life moved on, until it didn't. 5 months ago, everything changed. Fiona found out she couldn't have children. Her husband, Eddie, instead of standing by her, filed for divorce, said he wasn't willing to live a childless life. And just like that, Fiona's world collapsed. She started showing up at Mark and Ava's house constantly, crying, grieving, and Ava, because she's actually a decent human being, let it happen. She felt sorry for Fiona. Nobody deserves to go through that kind of pain. But sympathy, it turns out, can be a door you didn't mean to leave wide open. Here's the thing about letting someone into your home out of compassion: sometimes they don't come in as a guest. Sometimes they come in like they own the place. Fiona moved in temporarily. That was the agreement, just until she got back on her feet, just until the divorce was finalized and she had somewhere to go. Mark asked Ava directly, and Ava, despite every instinct screaming otherwise, said yes. She said yes because she's not a monster. She said yes because watching someone fall apart in front of you is hard. She said yes because Mark looked at her with those eyes and she still loved him. And within days, she regretted every single second of that decision. Fiona didn't move in like someone who was grateful for a roof over her head. She moved in like a critic hired to review every corner of Ava's life. The food? Wrong. The furniture? Ugly. The TV shows Ava liked to unwind with after work? Unwatchable. And somehow, all of Fiona's complaints got accommodated. Because according to Mark, she was going through something traumatic and needed to feel comfortable. Ava's comfort apparently was not part of the equation. Every time Ava pushed back, every time she said, "This isn't working, she needs to leave," Mark had the same answer ready. He was scared Fiona might hurt herself if they kicked her out in such a vulnerable state. And what do you do with that? How do you argue against someone else's mental health being used as a reason to erase your own boundaries in your own home? Ava stayed quiet. She swallowed it, day after day, until the day she came home from work and walked straight into the moment that broke everything. Mark had left work early. She didn't know why until she walked through the door and saw him carrying his clothes out of their bedroom. Not packing for a trip, not doing laundry, moving his things into Fiona's room. Ava stood there, just frozen. That specific kind of shock where your brain refuses to process what your eyes are clearly seeing. She pulled him aside and asked very calmly, because she was trying to hold it together, what exactly is happening right now? And Mark, cool as anything, told her he'd decided to sleep in the guest room with Fiona because Fiona had been having panic attacks at night and needed someone there to comfort her when she woke up. Let me say that again so it lands properly. Her husband decided to sleep in the same room as another woman in their house without asking his wife, without warning, without a single conversation. And when Ava lost it, rightfully, completely, absolutely lost it, both Mark and Fiona stood there and smiled at her, like she was overreacting, like she was the problem, like they were so confident in their logic that her reaction was just background noise. That smile. That smile was the thing that did it. Because here's what happened next. And this is the part that tells you everything you need to know about who Ava actually is. She didn't scream, she didn't throw things, she got quiet, she smiled back at them, told them she understood completely, that everything was fine. Mark, visibly relieved, actually said he knew she'd come around. And while they went back to rearranging the guest room, Ava walked calmly into the master bedroom, opened a drawer, and pulled out the property documents for the house. See, and this detail matters. The house wasn't theirs, it was hers. Her father had gifted it to her when she got her first job. Her name, only her name, on every single legal document. She walked back into that guest room, documents in hand, and very politely asked if they'd finished unpacking. They said yes. She said, great. Start packing again, because in a few minutes you're both going to be outside and you can play house all you want out there. What followed was exactly the kind of chaos you'd expect. Mark insisted she was being absurd. Fiona cried, shocking, truly shocking. Mark accused Ava of always being jealous, always being insecure, of never trusting him. And Ava? She didn't even deny it. She said, you're right, I was insecure, but the problem was never me. It was whatever this is between the two of you. She told them both, if you can't survive without each other, then you should never have dragged other people into your lives in the first place. They left, and for one brief moment, just one, Eva felt like it was over. It wasn't. Within hours of kicking them out, Eva's phone started blowing up. Not one or two messages, dozens. Friends she hadn't heard from in months, family members who had never once commented on her marriage, all of them suddenly very concerned, all of them saying essentially the exact same thing, word for word, like they'd been handed a script, because they had been. Mark had reached out to their entire social circle and fed them a narrative. Poor Fiona, going through the worst time of her life, panic attacks, grief, and Ava, cruel, jealous, insecure Ava, had thrown her out into the street over nothing, over friendship. The messages called her heartless, said she didn't deserve a man like Mark. Some of them went as far as saying they always knew she wasn't good enough for him, that deep down, even she knew it, which is why she'd always felt threatened by Fiona. Ava blocked every single one of them. Then Mark reached out from a different number, because of course he did. His message was softer this time, strategic. He said he still loved her, said he was willing to come back if she apologized, said she'd misunderstood everything and that if she just thought about it with a clear head, she'd realize she was about to throw away her marriage over a misunderstanding. He framed it as her mistake to fix. Ava didn't respond. She filed for divorce instead. The weeks that followed were a slow, painful unraveling of everything she thought her marriage was. There was the court appearance where Mark told her he'd wait the full 6 months the state required, as if that was romantic, as if his patience was proof of love rather than proof that he still thought he could change her mind. There was the moment she asked him point blank whether he was still living with Fiona, and he couldn't answer. Just stood there in the parking lot outside the courthouse, silent, while she waited. Then she got in her car and drove away. There was the visit where he sat on her couch and cried, and she felt nothing. Not anger, not love, just this hollow, exhausted nothing that told her she'd already grieved the marriage long before she filed the papers. She even tested him once, told him she might reconsider the divorce if he promised to cut Fiona out of his life completely. He stopped crying almost immediately, and then he launched into the same speech she'd heard 100 times. Fiona was like a sister. He couldn't abandon her, it would be cruel, it would be wrong, he couldn't. But leaving his wife, walking out of his marriage, apparently that part was manageable. Ava cut him off mid sentence and said, This, this right here is exactly why I'm leaving. I just gave you a choice and you chose her. Again, so don't you dare tell me I didn't give you a chance. He had nothing to say to that. He got up and walked out. And then came the moment that reframed everything. Weeks later, Mark showed up at her door again, unannounced, frantic. She almost didn't let him in, but he wasn't there to argue, he wasn't there to manipulate. He came in, sat down, and fell apart. And not in the performative way he had before. This was different. This was real. He told her what had happened. He'd taken a day off, he was depressed, struggling with the divorce, and he was alone in his room at his parents' house. And Fiona came in, said she wanted to comfort him, and then she started flirting with him. Not subtly, not ambiguously, openly, physically. She tried to get close to him in a way that made it impossible to pretend it was sisterly or friendly or anything other than exactly what it was. He pushed her away, told her he wasn't in the mood for games. She didn't stop. So he stopped her, firmly. And in that moment, he said, everything clicked. Everything Ava had been trying to tell him for years suddenly made horrifying, undeniable sense. They fought. A real fight. And Fiona, finally exposed, finally caught, dropped the act entirely. She told him he'd been leading her on for years, that he'd made her believe there was something between them, that when he married Ava instead of choosing her, it felt like a betrayal. Then she packed her bags and left. Mark sat on Ava's couch and said the words she had waited 7 years to hear. You were right. About all of it. I'm sorry. He admitted he hadn't seen it. He genuinely believed Fiona was just his friend, his sister figure, his constant. He hadn't understood that what felt like friendship to him felt like something else entirely to her, and that in protecting that friendship, he had slowly, consistently chosen Fiona over his own wife without ever realizing that was what he was doing. He said he didn't deserve her. He said the divorce was probably the right call, not because he didn't love her, but because he'd failed her in ways that mattered. For Ava, it wasn't a moment of triumph. It didn't feel like winning, it felt like finally being seen after years of being told she was paranoid, jealous, insecure by the one person whose opinion had always mattered most to her, and it still wasn't enough to save the marriage. Because some apologies come too late, not because the person saying them is lying, but because you've already done the work of letting go, and going back would mean undoing all of it. Eva had already grieved, already rebuilt, already decided who she was going to be on the other side of this. The divorce moved forward, quietly, without more fighting. So here's where we land. No affair, no smoking gun, no caught in the act moment that made everything simple and clean. Just years of slow erosion. A woman watching her marriage get quietly dismantled from the inside by someone who smiled at her face and undermined her existence at every turn. And a husband who genuinely believed none of it was happening. That's almost the hardest part to sit with, isn't it? Mark wasn't a villain twirling his mustache. He was a man who loved two people, in two completely different ways, and never once stopped to ask himself what the cost of that was. Never once considered that choosing Fiona over and over and over again in 100 small moments was still a choice, still a betrayal, even without the romance, even without the physical affair. Because here's the truth nobody talks about enough. You don't have to be cheating on someone to be failing them. Ava spent years being told she was the problem. Too jealous, too insecure, too sensitive. And the cruelest part? She started to believe it. She bent herself into knots trying to be okay with things that were not okay. because the man she loved kept telling her that her instincts were wrong. That's not just a bad marriage, that's gaslighting. Slow, consistent, well intentioned gaslighting, which, by the way, doesn't hurt any less just because the person doing it doesn't realize they're doing it. And Fiona? Let's talk about Fiona for a second. Because it would be easy to make her the straightforward villain of this story, the manipulative other woman who always had her eye on Mark and used her friendship as cover. And look, the evidence speaks for itself. The constant put downs toward Ava, the "you're third on his list" comment, the way she suddenly became a permanent fixture the moment her own marriage fell apart, the way she lit up when Mark moved into her room, and then that final confrontation, dropping the mask completely, telling Mark he'd been leading her on, calling him a traitor for marrying Ava. But here's what I keep coming back to. Fiona was also someone who had just lost everything: her ability to have children, her husband, her home, and rather than process any of that grief in a healthy way, she reached for the one thing she'd always used as a safety net: Mark. That doesn't make what she did okay, not even close, but it does make it human, messy and destructive and human. The real issue was never just Fiona. The real issue was that Mark let her be the answer to everything, including the things that should have had nothing to do with her. Now, the question everyone's been sitting with since the last update: did Ava make the right call? Even after Mark came back with a genuine apology, even after Fiona finally showed her hand and the truth was right there on the table, even after Mark admitted fully openly that Ava had been right about everything, should she have stayed? I'll tell you what I think. There's a version of this story where Ava forgives him and they rebuild, where the revelation about Fiona becomes the turning point that finally puts them on the same page, where Mark, having seen the truth with his own eyes, becomes the partner Ava always needed him to be. That version is possible, genuinely. But here's the other version, the one Ava actually chose, the one where she looked at 7 years of being dismissed, invalidated, and ranked below someone who never respected her, and decided that an apology, however sincere, doesn't erase the pattern. That love isn't enough if the person you love keeps making you feel like a supporting character in your own marriage. She didn't leave because she stopped loving him, she left because she finally started loving herself enough to know what she deserved. And honestly, that's not a tragedy, that's growth. The divorce is moving forward. Ava has her house, her name, her property, her space, and she's rebuilding her life on her own terms. Mark is figuring out who he is without Fiona as his emotional anchor. And Fiona, well, Fiona is dealing with consequences that were a long time coming. Nobody won here, but somebody finally stopped losing. And that's the thing about stories like this. They don't always end with a villain getting what they deserve or a hero riding off into the sunset. Sometimes they end with someone quietly closing a door on a chapter of their life, taking a breath, and deciding to start over. Sometimes that's the most powerful ending there is. So I want to hear from you. After everything, the manipulation, the gaslighting, the final confrontation, the apology that came just a little too late, do you think Ava made the right call? Would you have taken him back after he finally admitted the truth? Or would you have done exactly what she did? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to know where you stand on this one, because I've been going back and forth on it myself, and I don't think there's one clean answer. If this story hit you the way it hit me, hit that like button. It helps more people find this channel and these conversations. And if you're new here, subscribe. We do this regularly. Real stories, real people, real messy human situations that don't always have easy answers. Share this one with someone who needs to hear it. Because somewhere out there, there's a person who's been told they're too jealous or too sensitive one too many times. And they need to know they're not crazy. They never were. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.